So, December 8th, which was Monday, is considered Buddha's Enlightenment Day. So I thought I would talk some about that. I was taking a walk last night thinking about the daunting task of talking about the Buddha's Enlightenment. I'm going to start with a case from our Kanran book, The Whole World is a Single Flower. Many of you know about it, some of you don't. This is a collection of 365 kanrans, or koans is the word that probably most of you recognize. In our tradition, the kanrans come from the traditional Chinese kanrans. There's a whole series of Korean kanrans, there's some Christian kanrans, and there's some Taoist kanrans. So all those together make up 365, one for each day. This one is number 139. Some of you worked on this just a few weeks ago. Others of you may work on it again this Saturday. So we'll see. So this kanran is called The Buddha Saw a Star. Zen Master Bon Soeng, who is our, let's say, great-grand teacher, he lived in the early to mid-1900s. I guess he was probably born in the late 1800s. Zen Master Bon Soeng received a letter on Buddha's Enlightenment Day in which the monks of Kangdong Zen Temple asked him, on December 8th in the early morning, the Buddha saw a star and got enlightenment. What does this mean? Bon Soeng wrote back, the Buddha saw a star and said he got enlightenment. This is sand falling in your eyes. So let's pull that apart a little bit. It's probably fairly self-evident, but let's pull it apart a little bit. The Buddha saw a star, got enlightenment. The really important words there is the Buddha saw a star. You all heard a sound. Then what happens next? What do you do with that sound? The Buddha did nothing. No Buddha, no sound, no star, just. So the story says the Buddha saw a star. But listen to this sound. Do you hear the sound? Do you hear the sound? Who hears the sound? Where does the sound arise? Is it in this stick? Is it in this floor? Is it in your mind? Who is it that's deciding? That's what the Buddha's enlightenment hits. To say the Buddha saw a star and got enlightenment is making something. In the moment of the Buddha seeing a star, everything was complete. Why make enlightenment? We hear this word enlightenment, and watch your mind. What happens? What story are you telling yourself? What is it? And my hunch is, in the story, it's something that you're not, but if you were really, 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 really lucky, you would get. And then the image probably goes something like, once I have it, I'm done. Or maybe I'll find happiness. Or maybe all my problems will go away. When we were in India, we were told this story. I wish I remember the name of the town, but we were in the town that was the home of the winter retreats of the Buddha. And one of the Buddha's main disciples was Ananda. And Ananda was, I believe, Buddha's cousin. And while they were in this town, I think it starts with a V, The Buddha had I don't know if you'd call it a premonition or what, but he said, I'm going to die. So I need to leave and go to Kushinagar, which was, we had traveled to it, it's probably another maybe 100 kilometers from this town. And Ananda said, the story was told that Ananda got angry because the town they were in was Ananda's hometown. And Ananda said, what's wrong with this town? Why not die here? Why do you have to go somewhere else? I really like that story. Ananda, his great disciple, who truly, according to the myth, hadn't attained enlightenment yet, but he got angry. So Ananda was probably a lot like you, a lot like me. The Buddha had to deal with Ananda's anger. So, in a sense, you could say the Buddha had a problem. One of his main disciples, his right-hand person, you see Ananda's name all over the Buddhist stories and the Buddhist texts. He was angry, and the Buddha had to deal with that. His so-called enlightenment happened 45 years before. So the story tells us the Buddha didn't live a life with no problems. As I'm talking about this, I'm thinking that the Vinaya, which are the rules of the monastic community, were said to have been created by everyday situations that happened. The Buddha and the leadership of the Sangha had to respond to the problems that arose and make rules about it. Ananda, Buddha's cousin, was jealous of the Buddha and wanted to kill him. And this was a man in the Buddhist Sangha. So to think that the Buddha had this mystical experience and suddenly he had no problems strikes me as it's probably a myth. But you know, the myth starts even earlier than that. The monks wrote to Zen Master Bon Soeng and said, on December 8th, the Buddha saw a star and got enlightenment. But even if you believe the story, and we're talking 2,500 years ago, they didn't write any of it down for 500 years. So if you believe the story as fact, there's one problem. They were on the lunar calendar. There was no December. And in fact, as I understand it, the texts say the 8th day of the last month of the year, which on the lunar calendar is not December. The lunar calendar, the Jewish lunar calendar starts in September. The Asian lunar calendar, I think it varies a little bit, but it's somewhere January, February, March. It moves. So already we hear this story, we know this date. If you've been a practitioner of Buddhism, you know, especially Zen Buddhism, December 8th is the Buddha's Enlightenment Day. But it's not true. If Buddha's enlightenment was anything, it was letting go of the story and being with the experience. So Buddha saw a star and woke up. I said before, we all hear this. We too can wake up. That's the promise of Buddha, of the Buddha's teaching and of Buddhism and Zen itself. That we and the Buddha are not separate. We say the Buddha realized that he and the universe were one thing. And that's true for you, that's true for me. You and me are names. If the Buddha's enlightenment is anything, it speaks about not getting lost in name and form. Not getting lost in the story. Being able to perceive through the story and see the truth itself. The story's gone. Then the lights are shining. The floor is brown. Truth appears very clearly right in front of us. We all can see it. Of course, Lights, shining, floor, brown are names. Even they are not the thing itself. And our practice and our challenge is to return to the thing itself. You already perceive the thing itself. The next step is the story we make around it. Depending on our likes, our dislikes, our cultural conditioning, our education, our socioeconomic status, our gender, our religion, all of these things create a story. And inasmuch as we get trapped in the story, we lose the truth and we live a life of fantasy and suffering. Very simply put. In thinking about this talk, the story goes that the Buddha got enlightenment and he recognized the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. And that became the Buddha's teaching, and that's the way out of suffering. So most of us probably know the Four Noble Truths, but just to say them again, we translate life as suffering. A lot of people don't like that translation. They get mad. Life is suffering. What about joy? What about love? What about happiness? What about peace? Sometimes that word dukkha, which is where suffering comes from, is translated as unsatisfactory. Take a look at your own life. This isn't a story. Take a look at your own life. Feel what that unsatisfactoriness really means to you. Think of your life. The moment to 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 moment. Situations and conditions that arise that you need to respond to. Each one of us has our own life. We have our own situations. We have our own conditions. In a sense, the story we make up actually becomes real. And the story is co-created by all of us. I was talking with someone today about this very thing. And it came up, he was sitting on the couch. A couch is an idea that that historically got developed, and engineer after engineer, designer after designer, person after person added their idea to it, and then some craftsman or factory or machines, whichever time of history we're in, cut down some trees, looked at some plans that somebody made in their idea, cut the wood to the specifications, add the padding, look at the plans to see how the fabric need to be cut. The person who made the plans didn't cut the fabric. All was a fantasy in their mind, or an idea in their mind, or an inspiration in their mind. They drew it, made some specifications. Somebody took those specifications and made this thing that we call a couch, from an idea to reality. I think I talked about this a few weeks ago. I read this. The English word is reification. Taking an idea and making it concrete. We all get trapped in the reification of our own stories. We think it, we make it up, and then we make it real. And then we're trapped in it. And then we're bumping up against other stories that other people make, that they've made real. So suddenly conflict occurs. There's two sides of the story, we say. I hear the helicopters outside. There's a lot of demonstrating, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of feeling these days about what's going on with the police and the African American community. There's two sides to a story. The stories collide and people die. Maybe if you have one view, it's like that you think the cops have a particular view of what's going to happen when they get called into the African American community. And what happens is, like what happened in Cleveland, a cop pulls up, in a second and a half he shoots a kid that he sees with a gun. In a second and a half he decided what happened. The idea becomes reality. You carry your bias, your preference, and you make it reality. Much of the time, it's not that important. Maybe you decide to eat something that you want, or you don't eat on your plate what you don't want. But sometimes somebody lays dead right next to you. Another thing in the news that just came out is the report on torture. Americans like to think we don't do that, but then we find out we do that. And then as I watch the news, the discussion ends up moving around to, did we get good information from the torture? And every time I hear that, I think, you're asking the wrong question. Even if we got good, now you're just getting my story, so be careful. But even if we got good information, does that justify, you don't even know what this word means, fecal feeding? What does that mean? That's what they did. The people who did it probably genuinely believed they were doing the right thing. But you know what happens? And I was reading this one article today, and it says every time we get into a war, which lately seems to be all the time, again, watch out, you got an editorial comment out of me, hysteria happens. And in the hysteria, we start to do things that we say we don't do. So the examples were in the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln, he didn't abolish it, but he decided that he didn't have to follow habeas corpus, which means, I can't get it now, but some particular rights that you have that suddenly you didn't have because we're in a war. Or it was decided during World War II that the Japanese were a danger, so we had to put them into internment camps. After the war, well, maybe we went overboard. Took till the 1980s till the American government actually apologized and paid reparations. 300 years in this country, or more, we had slavery. These are big examples. But all of us also get caught up in a frenzy and hysteria and end up doing things that we look back on afterward and say, holy shit, I did that? You know that phrase, I don't do that. That's not me. But we often say that after looking at something that doesn't fit our idea of who we are. Buddha's enlightenment, the Buddha saw through the story. And not only did he see through it, but he was able, maybe I'm making a story here, but the way I would say it, he was able not to get sucked into the story or the hysteria. He kept his balance. Zen Master Bon Soeng would always poke at us in our stomach and say, make your center stronger, stronger, stronger. That strong center is about not getting sucked into the hysteria. These are my words. I'm now throwing sand in your eyes. But out of these words, look at yourself. Look at your own hysteria. Look at the way you get destabilized. Look at the way the story sucks you in. And you lose your wisdom. You lose your compassion. You know, everybody knows how to live. Everybody knows how to make world peace. every philosophy, well, I don't know enough about philosophy, but I imagine in almost every philosophy it's in there. Certainly everything that we call a religion, doesn't matter what the religion is, the root to world peace is there. Do unto others as you'd have others do unto you. Well, you probably wouldn't do fecal feeding if you were doing unto others as you'd want others to do unto you. You wouldn't be ripping off the other. You wouldn't be pushing others out of the way to get what you want, because you don't want others to do that to you. Everybody knows this. Every little child knows this. They're all taught it. But mostly we can't do it, because I, my, me rules the show. The story, the idea, that sense of separation and individuality, and my needs become predominant. And when we're lost in the dream of our own I, my, me, we lose the truth. We color everything to fit our story. And our story is set up to get what we want and to keep away what we don't want. The Buddha's enlightenment is about not getting sucked into the story. Now, this is all, it's all interesting to me because, when the Buddha talked about the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, he set up a way for monastics. And in a sense, as I understand the history, the monastic left home. In a way, the whole point was to separate yourself from the story and start over with no story at all. Then you don't own anything. In the old days, it was with begging bowls every morning. The monks and nuns would go out and they'd collect their food, whatever was put in their bowl, and then they went back and they ate their food, and that was it. How many of us would live that way? We like to choose what we get to eat. We all have a very individual diet that we need to use to keep our stomachs well, or to keep our weight low, or to satisfy our desire of satisfaction in eating. But the Buddha told the monastics, don't be attached to that. Eat what you're given, and that's enough. Don't get sucked into the story. We lay people live a different life. We have to find a way to take the truth that the Buddha taught and make it fit in a life of a homesteader, if you will, where we do own things, we do have things, we do have domestic problems that we have to deal with. And we have to find a way not to get sucked into the hysteria and to actually calmly and clearly allow our wisdom and compassion to emerge. It is possible. But if we don't do our own work, the story overwhelms us, and we just get sucked into the hysteria. So we have these beautiful practices that have come down from the time of the Buddha as ways of helping us not get sucked in. When we do retreats, we sit in this room for hours, breathing in, what am I? Breathing out, don't know. Or breathing in, clear mind, clear mind, clear mind. Breathing out, don't know. And then our job is to watch. Don't touch it. Don't dwell on it, but observe the arising and falling of mind. And keep our energies in our lower abdomen, that making our center stronger. And the power of that is finding out that we don't have to get sucked in. That the arising and falling of desire or fear or thought or idea We can watch it arise, we can watch it fall, and we don't have to do anything about it. Now, of course, in our everyday lives, we do have to do things about things. But in retreat, it's wonderful. We don't have to do anything. The schedule takes care of everything. And whatever is going on in our minds, or our hearts, or our bodies, doesn't really matter. The retreat has its own direction. We don't have to act on it. We're safely ensconced in this room, and we just watch. And we learn that just because I think it, and just because I feel it, number one, doesn't mean it's true, and number two, means it doesn't mean I have to do anything. So we get some power to make choices, and we get some, I'm not sure this is a Buddhist word, but we get some mastery so that there's choice, not just habit, not just gravitating towards what I want, pulling away from what I don't want. We get to choose. And if we can find that place of choice, we found freedom. The word Buddha means awake. Awake means I can see, I can hear, I can smell, I can taste the truth. I'm awake. I'm not asleep. I'm not lost in the fantasy of my own drama. And you know it. We all live in the movie of our own drama. But our own drama is just a fantasy. But remember that word reification. We take our fantasy and we actually make it concrete. It's always easy to point to the horrible cases. But the fantasy of the man or the woman who desires a little baby sexually, some of them make it real. And then that little baby grows up damaged by the acting out of the dream. Now that's a bad one. Most of us would say, and probably all of us would say, I don't do that. I can tell the difference between my desire for it and my action about it. And I like to say, if you can tell that difference, that means you already understand choice. Sometimes people tell me, I got angry, I couldn't help it. I had to do it. And I say to them, did you punch him in the nose? They say, oh no, I wouldn't do that. So I said, oh, so you do have some choice. The question is where you draw the line. And with practice, with returning to don't know, it's possible to find that. Making our center stronger means we have the capacity to not do what we want and sometimes do what we don't want. Suddenly, my desire, isn't in control anymore. And as I say, it's probably true for all of us, that desire does not control everything. Because sometimes I really want to punch you in the nose, but I choose not to do it anyway. And as simple as that explanation is, inside of that is your own path to freedom. Where do you draw the line? And if you can go all the way back to not making anything, before this stick hits this book, there's no sound. You choose whether to bring your arm down or not. When the arm comes down, the sound appears. This stick, this book, these sound waves into your ear. But if the head doesn't come down, before thinking mind, before I, me. I, my, me are ideas. Before that, there's nothing but the thing itself. Return to that. And you get a little bit of a taste of what we call and make a story of enlightenment. Question? Comment? Anything anybody wants to talk about?
Thank you for your talk. Aren't some stories beneficial, or should we let go of every single story?
Everything is beneficial. I told about 15 stories in my half-hour talking. Let them all go, but use everything. The biggest mistake you made today, use that. The best thing that happened to you, use that. And everything in between. And then let go. But use everything. Everything is a path to awakening. If you use it. If you don't use it, it's a path to hell. You choose. Anybody else? Question? Comment? So, the helicopters are still flying. That means people are in the streets making the voice heard. Some people like that. Some people don't like that. You're free to decide. But life, being alive, is in the being. And in the being is in the expression of your own nature. The important thing is that we express ourselves. The Buddha, we say, the story is he got enlightenment. He thought he was done. Nobody's going to understand this. I'm just going to live in what I've experienced. But then it was realized, no, maybe I have 5 friends. Maybe they'll get it. And that started out his journey of teaching for 45 years. We can keep it for ourselves, or we can give it away. The Buddha way is to give it all away, whatever it is. But that entails expression, being alive. Do it, and take the consequences for your behavior.
My question is, can you does practice always mean a technique?
Practice isn't a technique. The technique helps your practice.
So what's the practice?
What am I? Don't know. But those 2 are words. For some practitioners of Buddhism, the practice is that of awareness. Be aware of everything. For some practitioners of Zen Buddhism, especially Korean style, it's raising great doubt. That's technique. But it's about waking up. Everything that happens is practice. The technique gives us a little bit of a guidepost, maybe, or a path, but oftentimes we're right in the middle of it and we just have to find our way. So you can rely on technique or teachings or theory, but ultimately you just have to meet the moment and stay awake. There's no technique in that.
So if I were to get frustrated, like practicing here, and I would go and I was like, I just want a hamburger. And so I would go and I would go get a hamburger and I would eat the hamburger and I wouldn't think just eat the hamburger, or I wouldn't think about mindfulness or anything, is that practice too, me getting frustrated?
No, wait. You getting frustrated, you going out and eating the hamburger, depending on how you keep your mind, that's practice. If you go blank, if you lose your awareness, if you just start eating to push away the frailing of frustration, and you just get lost in that, that's falling asleep. Now you can use that as practice, because a minute later you're holding your stomach, and you're saying, geez, I got frustrated a half hour ago, and I don't even remember what happened in the last half hour, and here I am with a stomach ache. You're back to practice. Because you're aware, you're paying attention, you're there. Practice is being there. What's happening right now? When you're doing something, do it. These are all catchphrases that we have, but they mean something. And you're eating, if you want to practice while you're eating the hamburger, be aware of eating the hamburger. Be aware of what brought you to the burger place. That's practice. The only thing that's not practice is falling asleep. And even that's practice because you can use that to wake up. But you're still, it's the intention to wake up. It's the direction of I can be asleep or I can be awake. My intention is to wake up, then everything becomes practice. If my intention is to satisfy all my desires and keep away all the things that I don't like, that's probably not practice. It's not the technique you use, it's the intention and the awareness that you bring to it. The technique helps you develop that. But you have to use it. That's practice. Practice, in a way, isn't sitting on these cushions. This is the means that we have to wake up. Now, in the Soto school, they say taking the posture, sitting zazen, is in itself enlightenment. Why is that? Because you're doing it. You're doing it. It's the awareness and the beingness of it. That's practice. Does that touch your question? It's very easy to get lost in the technique and mistake the technique for the point. It's not the technique.
So somewhere in your talk you said something about losing your compassion, and so that brought up a picture of someone that I've lost my compassion for, right?
Already you're practicing with it.
And so then what came up then when I saw that I'd lost my compassion for that person, this is just a little, as we're sitting here, was I felt guilty. Like, oh, that's embarrassing. Look at that. I've lost my compassion for this person. I've labeled them. I'm mean to them, let's say, or whatever, or I have non-compassionate thoughts about them. So then the next thing that came up was guilt. And then so I thought about that, like, what is that? So I thought I could easily get stuck in the guilt and just stay there. It's like, oh God, I'm such an asshole. But then to see the guilt, then what, right?
And to see everything you just said is wrapped around I. My sense of who I am. I'm not supposed to lose my compassion. I. It's all around that limited self. You're nodding. We all know this. We mostly live in this little box. So in the temple rules it says if you break the walls of yourself, you're already infinite in time and space. So, picking up on Chris's question, practice is just what you did, seeing the guilt, But it's not so much about trying to get rid of the guilt. It's about seeing the connection of guilt to the sense of I. No I, no guilt. On a psychological level, the guilt can either make things worse, or the guilt can help you wake up. The guilt can say, why do I feel guilty? I feel guilty because I know better. I feel guilty.
I'm embarrassed.
I'm embarrassed. That was the first thing you said.
Yeah.
I is embarrassed. It takes this creation of I to be embarrassed. So you can use that to try to get rid of your embarrassment, but even better is use it to get rid of I. Then there's no worry about compassion anymore. It's just the moment-to-moment beingness.
Then things become clear.
Yeah, because I isn't interceding and distorting everything. See, it all comes back to the problem of I. This is really hard to touch. It's really hard to get it. You know, as Paul said, I'm a psychotherapist, and some of my clients are very long-time Zen practitioners. And it's still the same thing. Everything we're dealing with is the problem of self. Self is very tricky. This attachment to who I am. So, I know you do this, Paul. It's really one technique, Chris, is listening for the word I. I want. And some of you probably haven't done it lately, but one of the little tricks I play on myself, is I use the word I in the third person. So instead of saying I want, it's I wants. Then suddenly this I gets revealed as an object. Because that's what we're doing. We're making ourselves into an object as we're attached to I. So it's a little helpful tool. I wants. I is angry, rather than I'm angry. I is angry. What is I? What am I? That's the fundamental tool that we have for practice. Any last question before we end? Two. First two.
How does the setting intention incorporates with practice without getting too attached to the idea of I? Because it's my intention and I am setting intention.
Yeah, well, you already did it by questioning who's setting the intention. You know, it's both and, it's not either or. We can say on one hand, I is the problem and I is a fantasy and there is no I. In our everyday life, we have volition. I does operate in this human world. And rather than abdicating from the human world, we have to work with it. So setting the intention helps us work with it. Every morning we chant the 4 great vows. They help us with our intention. And interestingly, we don't say I, we say we. Sentient beings are numberless, we vow. It's not just me, it's all of us. But it's a wonderful intention to start our day with. Sentient beings are numberless, we vow to save them all. Delusions are endless, we vow to cut through them all. The teachings are infinite, we vow to learn them all. The Buddha way is inconceivable, we vow to attain it. Each one of those 4 things are impossible, especially if we hold I. But we set our intention as a way, it's a technique to help us wake up and to help heal the world. Okay? Yes, sir.
If I am kidnapped and you are tasked to save my life, I would be okay with your judgment to do whatever you think is necessary at that time to save my life.
you might be wrong. You could
Yeah.
trust me, but I might kill you in the process.
And that's fine, because your intention was something other than
Yeah.
for yourself.
Yeah.
But you had that choice. And then
I
after,
have which choice?
whatever choice that you made.
Yes. So did the cop who shot the kid. And I want to be careful. I don't know all the facts. That cop man had done just what he had to do. What I mostly know is I don't know. But we make the choice, and we have to live with the consequences. And to me, the consequences are one of the most important techniques we have. It's like we live, we act, and there's a result. What happened? Those consequences are very clarifying. And if we want to develop wisdom, we have to include the consequences.
And so, as long as you did your best effort, I would hope that people don't second guess you afterwards.
Yeah, but you know what? Sometimes I need to be second guessed.
That's also true.
Because I did my best effort, but I might have been very, very wrong. So, we're all in this together. Nobody gets out alive. And nobody is, I'm using a double negative, I don't know how else to say it. Nobody is not complicit.
Yes.
We're all part of the story. And if we only hold a one-sided view, we miss the whole story. And then our one-sided fantasy makes us wrong. And none of us were there. So we don't really know. We weren't there when the Buddha saw the star. We just know the story that's been told for 2,500 years. And you know what happens to stories when they go around the room playing telephone. We don't know. That not knowing is our safety point. If we can rest in not knowing, suddenly we're open. Suddenly we're alive. It's the narrowness of our knowing. But I'm not suggesting that we don't act. For the folks that are out there underneath the helicopter, they're acting. Probably a lot of them hold a one-sided view. Probably the guy or the woman who's flying the helicopter has a one-sided view. But you gotta act. And pay attention. See what happens. And adjust accordingly. But we need clear eyes. And that's where working with not being a slave to I. We need clear eyes, E-Y-E-S. But being a slave to our concept of I is what clouds our eyes. Okay, a little bit over time. Thank you all very much. I hope you can take advantage of this very moment. Use it to wake up and help this world. That's all we can do.